Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Sarah Traver, I'm the director here at Traver Gallery, and I am very pleased to be here with our featured artist this month, Andrea Dezsö. And Andrea's had a few shows with the gallery now, and every time it just is a total delight. And the work that you bring to us is so beautiful and has this really wonderful personal quality to it. And so when we have your work here in the gallery, it feels like we're getting to know you better. Thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you.
Andrea is an artist that works, I think, in just about any medium.
Many mediums.
Many mediums. Is there a medium you don't work with?
I haven't done anything with weaving yet, but I'm very interested.
But you're pretty close with embroidery.
Yes.
So we'll walk through the show together and learn from Andrea a little bit about her process and the content in the work and all the materials that you've been using.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you want to jump in and just tell us a little bit about the show title, which is storytelling?
Yes, it is storytelling, and there are a lot of media. There's painting and glass and pyrovitriography. There are embroideries, so there are some wooden wall sculptures. So what unites them in my mind is the idea of stories behind the work and in the work. Some of the work is more overtly storytelling, such as the embroideries, which are from the Lessons from My Mother series, where I work with these wisdoms that I grew up with in Transylvania, such as if you put your clothes on backwards or inside out, you're going to be lucky. So there, the story is very overtly in the work and on the work. And other works, the stories are more covert, and there's much more kind of like an iceberg effect where we see the tip of it, and then there's all these stories that are underneath it. Sometimes the story is connected to what appears in the work, but oftentimes it's about the material, the use of the materials, the media, the relationships that led to the creation of the work, the connections that were made, and then also the space that I leave, an ambiguous space that I purposefully leave, that people can inhabit with their own thoughts about what this might be. So I'm trying in every piece to leave this openness so that things are not as specific as to it can only be one story or one interpretation, but where it invites conversation or reflection or kind of inhabiting the work with your interpretation as the viewer.
Yeah, I think maybe we can talk about the work that's right behind us, because these sort of touch on a lot of those elements that you just talked about. And these are what you're calling pyrovitriography. Can you start by talking about what that process is? 'Cause it's
yes, this is a really
amazing.
exciting process for me. These were created at the Museum of Glass, and the process is basically the following. There's a glass cylinder that's a blank that's created, and we cover that with buttercut, with a kind of acrylic mask material, and I cut out these images by hand, and then we sandblast these blanks so that everything that's not the image is being sandblasted away. So there's a relief of glass on the surface of the cylinder. These cylinders then get heated up, and when they're really, really hot to the point of they're almost like soft, they get rolled on paper, and they burn these images into the glass. And so that's where it comes from, because it's pyro means fire, and vitriography is like the printing with glass. So they are monotypes. Actually, every time that they get rolled on the paper, because of the glass cylinder is so soft, it torques a little bit. So the figures, the images, the compositions, whatever is on on the rolling glass gets distorted slightly with each roll. So they create these either almost like expressions or dances or kind of interesting changes that I can't quite control. And that's another thing that I'm really interested in, where it's almost like collaborating with the process itself and with the material, and let the material have its own say, and the process kind of behave in certain ways, and then me responding to it. So that's how these were created.
Yeah, that's something that I notice throughout your work is the way that you engage with materials and allow the materials to have a voice within the work. I think for example, these paintings, the way that you're even getting the pigments, and it's so, the process is so much part of the content of the work.
Yes, so with these ones, I made the paper also myself. I created this paper in Hawaii. It's a wauke paper, which is a Hawaiian version of kozo. The kozo fiber, the wauke fiber, is grown there. I made these at the Donkey Mill Art Center. They have a wonderful paper making studio. And then the paper is pieced together because of the sheets. They come in smaller sheets, and when I want to make bigger works, I piece them almost like a quilt together. And then I use kakishibu, which is a Japanese persimmon tannin that they use to waterproof paper or to insect-proof paper. That's what gives that orange brownish color. And then I paint on them with colors that are mostly inspired from traditional ochres or old kind of very restricted palette ways of painting. And the black part of the imagery is stencil. It's actually pochoir, so I'm stenciling those on. And the material is more and more interesting and important, and I'm more interested in getting involved with making the material itself, not just using material that's available commercially, and connecting with it in that way, because there's something really wonderful and interesting to me in making the material itself, in knowing how that paper was made and actually having my hands on when it's like a pulp, and forming it with consideration to how I want to use it later. And it has a very deep connection to nature. So wherever I make these, I make now pigments and paper and all these things, wherever I learn them, people who teach me how to make these things have a very deep connection to nature and how that works and how to do it sustainably. And that's a more and more important part of my work nowadays.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the figures in your work and what your intent is with the figures?
Yes. So my intention is to create these spaces where the imagination can take flight from there. I'm really interested in encounters, in like meeting the other, or going to other worlds, or people from other worlds coming to us and having these connections, these moments when we connect with either a person or an animal or an extraterrestrial or some kind of an imaginary being or a force of nature that there are these moments of interaction that are really genuine and are really unforgettable. And so I'm constantly inspired by moments when I encountered the other, or the other encountered me, and I was seen and I saw them. And so somehow that permeates the work, but not necessarily in a literary sense. So I kind of start working, I'm not really thinking ahead of like, this is what I'm gonna do. It kind of just flows through, and then I arrive to this image that has these encounters in
Yeah.
them.
You mentioned ambiguity earlier, and I think that's something that is really powerful in your work, that everybody who encounters a painting of yours or a sculpture of yours can bring themselves to it and have their own relationship with it. The narrative is clear. I mean, there's figures and there's animals and there's an implied sort of happening, but it's not so specific that you're guiding a viewer through,
Right.
you know, a set of circumstances or to an end point. It's
Yes.
just inviting them to be a part of it.
Right, and to tell the story that is not necessarily the story that I would have thought about, but it can be many stories contained in a single piece of work. And I think that's especially possible where there's some kind of figuration, because we are just really prone to put characteristics and stories on top of situations where we see animate beings part of, even when it's an abstract painting, oftentimes people imbue it with story, but when there are characters, they immediately try to guide us into like the story.
We create associations and narratives, absolutely. Let's take a look at some of the wood pieces if we can. This is a series that we introduced a similar series of this work in your last show, and it's just kind of continuing to evolve. And I feel like with these most recent ones, there's even more kind of layers and texture and the use of color.
Yes, I feel that these are more exuberant than the first ones, so they kind of go further. I started working with wood, laser cut wood, when I started working at the Rhode Island School of Design, because we have some really wonderful research labs there.
You're a professor there.
I'm a professor there in the illustration department. And I have access to all these amazing fabrication methods. And I'm really interested in using and experimenting with any kind of fabrication methods, but especially digital fabrication methods that work with real materials and expand my, my way of working, where I can make with a digital laser cutter precise cuts that I wouldn't be able to make by hand or with hand tools, because the turnarounds are so steep, or these would not be done by hand. And so I'm really interested in working with actual real materials. And so at RISD, when I started experimenting with these figures. And now they got more and more kind of elaborate, or I'm taking it a bit further. They are these characters, these figures, these beings in their own houses is the way I see them, that each one has their own kind of energy and their own power almost. One interesting thing about this series is that I'm not sure if they can be continued at this point, because the material that I've been using is no longer available to me. This is Baltic birch, a marine grade Baltic birch plywood, very, very high quality, that traditionally comes from Russia. And now, because of the occupation of war in Ukraine, we don't have this material coming anymore. So there's a limited supply. I kind of used up the supply that I knew existed, and the replacement material cannot be cut as precisely. So it will never look the same. So until the supply chain somehow rights itself or takes care of itself, this is it. It's kind of precious material that's no longer there. So that's kind of part of the story behind this, that every time I worked with these, I knew that those were the only pieces of wood I have left. So I worked with them in such a way that I know that I might never be able to do this again.
Yeah. Yeah, they're beautiful. I love that you call them protectors.
Yes.
Let's take a look at the embroidery. This is a sort of a different series of your work, which I love a lot, and relates to your mother and your upbringing. And
That's right. So this is a series that I started many, many years ago, and these are the latest pieces in the series. And since I created these, my mother passed away, so they have a special kind of poignancy for me, these last pieces. And as I was working on these embroideries, not just these, but from the beginning of the series, I started with maybe 3 or 5 that I knew I wanted to do, with things that my mother used to tell me that I grew up with in Transylvania. And as I was making them, more and more memories came up, and I remembered more and more of these sayings. And while at the beginning I thought there were only 3 or 5 of them, at this point I'm over 100, and
oh my gosh.
there are still some that I haven't made yet, because the more you kind of work with this, the more come to the surface, and that's kind of how memory works. So my mother always used to say that whoever loves flowers cannot be a bad person, and a logical corollary is that if somebody steals flowers or food, that's not theft, that's okay. And so that I haven't done that one yet, but one thing kind of leads to another. And then another one with the flowers is that cemeteries are lovely but sad. So this was an interesting thing, because we would walk in the cemetery as children, and I kind of felt like I could never see a cemetery as I would see a park and be as exuberant, even though it might look the same, or the same flowers or plants might be there, but I always have to keep in mind that it has to be sad. So the beauty and exuberance versus beauty and sadness was such an interesting concept that I just didn't quite understand. And I wanted to create this image that contains that kind of slight strangeness of maybe a little weird and a little scary, but also really...
The little tiny figures in there are so wonderful.
Thank you.
I love them. I also love, and I haven't really talked to you about this, so I don't know if you feel the same way, but to me, there is in these pieces not only the sort of your family and the personal traditions and stories, but there's a history of sort of women's arts in this, and the traditional crafts that have been carried through time by women and have not historically been thought of as art.
Yes.
But in fact are totally art, whether it's embroidery or paper making or these sort of traditional crafts that really belong to women around the world, uniquely, and like have all of these stories attached to them.
Yes, and that was a very conscious decision of why I wanted to make these as embroideries, because just the same way as the sayings or this wisdom was passed down from my mother to me, or my grandmother to my mother to me, I was looking for a medium that has the same quality of being passed down through women from one. And I come from a very matriarchal, family where women were like always kind of the strong continuation of tradition and kind of heads of household. And so I wanted to match the medium with the imagery and with the concept of the work, and embroidery seem to have been that thing. But also, just as you said, it's not just my family, but it feels like there's a connection everywhere, and there's a kind of sisterhood of the material, and how this has not been really taken as seriously as something else.
Let's take a look at maybe a couple of the pieces over here. Some of the glass pieces, which in a couple cases, these are collaborative.
Yes.
And I know that the connection to the Pacific Northwest and glass here in the area has been really a fruitful and productive space for you recently. Can you share a little bit about how you came to it and
Yes.
what you're enjoying about it?
Yes, so originally the first time I came to glass was in 2014. I believe it was 10 years ago when I got the good fortune of being invited to the Pilchuck Glass School as an artist in residence. And I encountered an incredible energy and an incredible community. I've never worked with glass before. And I felt that the community of artists who worked with glass was so powerful and so nurturing and inspiring that I just wanted to keep being part of it. And so these particular sculptures, these are hot sculptures. I collaborated with Dan Friday, who's an incredible artist and a good friend of ours. And the way we imagined this collaboration was that we are going to put together some of Dan's figures and some of my figures and create these sculptures with them. And they were made when I was last at the Museum of Glass 2 years ago. And it was a really, really fun collaboration. And these figures, the black figures or the black and yellow figures are my figures, and the bear and the mountain are Dan's figures. But Dan has seen my figures as drawings only. He has not seen these as sculptures. And so part of it was that he would interpret the drawings that I made in three-dimensional hot glass, which was super exciting to me. And I'm just really delighted that we were able to collaborate on these pieces. That piece is one of the hot glass cylinders that was one of the pyrovitriography cylinders that we rolled on paper. And Ben Cobb and his team at the Museum of Glass actually helped me create these pieces. This was blown out after we made all the prints with it.
So this would have started as a cylinder, a solid cylinder,
yes,
that was used to make the print from.
Exactly.
And then they put it back on the blowpipe and blew it out into a vessel.
And they created this vessel, and there's the pyrovitriography print on the wall. Because they blew it out, this is much better, much bigger. So all the figures are much bigger than theirs.
They get stretched out.
They got stretched out and enlarged. And so I feel that the whole one thing leads to another that I enjoy so much in making art, where if this can be done, then what's the next thing that can go from there and can be done? This is a very good example of that, because the first time that I did an artist in residency at MOG and I was making Graal glass, the last day, the last minute of that residency, Ben actually said, "Did you know that you can do this with a Graal?" And he rolled it on a paper. And that's what was this aha moment, that you can actually do it as a printmaking method. So everything is about these relationships and these encounters and these amazing collaborations between people who have different ideas and different pieces of knowledge and different expertise. And it's just the most inspiring thing, because you never know what is going to happen next and what you're going to be able to do next.
Yeah, and I'd say amazing collaboration between you and the materials that you choose to work with too. That's so evident, and that you're not controlling those materials, you're inviting them to be a part of your process and making the work. And I guess one final question for you. What are you working on now? What's exciting to you? What's happening in the studio?
I'm working on paintings that I make with colors that I foraged. So I have been making inks with plants that I grow and that I forage. And I've been making color with ochres that I found in Maine on beaches. And before, in the past, I found ochres that were from the yellow to the brown and red range, but now I have greens and blues and purples, and I just can't believe how incredible that you can basically walk on color. And so foraging for them, walking and spending time in that space in nature and observing, it takes a long time. It's a slow process. Grinding them and using them, making them into paint is a slow process, and painting with them is also a slow process, and it just creates this amazing way of feeling that you really don't need that much. You can just show up with a paintbrush and a little bottle of gum arabic, and if you don't have commercial paint or commercial materials, you'll be able to still do your practice. You'll find it. Nature will provide.
That's incredible. Andrea, thank you so much. This is a beautiful exhibition. I hope you all will be able to come and see it in person. The show is up through August 31st here in the gallery, and we'll have video posted online as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Congratulations on a beautiful show.
Thank you.